Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. Last year, Defense Secretary Ash Carter said Russia is endangering world order and undertaking challenging activities at sea, in the air, in space, and in cyberspace. Of course, on the other side, after the recent NATO meetings in Warsaw, a spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry said the deep divide between the NATO policy of strengthening its eastern flank when the enormous terrorist threat is coming from the south is evidence of the bloc's disregard for the critical need to serve and protect the security of the people in the NATO member states. Exaggerated attempts are being made to demonize Russia in order to justify the military measures taken by the bloc to draw public attention away from the destructive role of the bloc and some of its allies in provoking crises and fanning tensions around the world. That, again, is from a statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry. For most of the 20th century, the U.S. and the Soviet Union was supposed to be engaged in a great struggle between capitalism and socialism. So why now that Russia is a capitalist country is a new Cold War developing with similar rhetoric as in the past? What is this contention really about? Now joining us to help answer that question from Moscow is Alexandr Buzgalin. Alexandr is professor of political economy at Moscow State University. Thanks for joining us, Alexandr.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be again in your TV, and I'm glad to give you the answer if I can do this, of course.
Well, so after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall falls, and so on, why doesn't Russia become more integrated into Western capitalism? Why doesn't it become more like a Germany? Why not sort of become part of this Western economic umbrella, become integrated? Why such continued contention?
Thank you. I'm sorry for interruption, but it's really a very big, complex question. First of all, we had period in 1990s when Russia was a good friend of United States, and Boris Yeltsin, president of Russia, was one of the best friends of US presidents, and we had very good relations with NATO. Even first years of Putin in the beginning of 21st century, Russia was also not bad from the point of view of US government and from the point of view of NATO bosses. What's happened? There are different aspects. First of all, there is Russia and Russia. There are different social, economic, political forces inside my country. But first of all, I want to start from geopolitical aspects, where Russia is one country. And here I want to stress that there is, I can say even more, it was, it is, and it will be competition between different capitalist countries. Wars between capitalist countries were the normal, if I can say so, agenda for 19th century, for 20th century. I want to remind, the First World War was not war against socialism. It was war between different democratic, liberal, capitalist countries like Britain, France, Germany, United States, and so on. Now we are moving in more or less the same direction. After 100 years, we have again situation similar with situation which took place when First World War appeared, and it's really very dangerous. Why Russia? Why now? My comment is following. Russia, especially not Russia as a country, but Russian leaders made some decisive and radical steps. And it was first time when country, government said no to NATO. Let's just talk about last examples. War in Iraq. What is the reaction of the world community? Either yes, we applaud to US government, it's wonderful war, we like this war, and US are doing fantastic things. One reaction. Second official reaction, we abstain, but nothing against. In Crimea, in Ukraine, Russia first time said no. US wanted to continue activity, and not only US, NATO countries, continue activity in Ukraine and to transform Ukraine in the satellite of NATO. And Crimea also should be part of this NATO space. But Russia first time said, no, we don't like idea of NATO. We will beat NATO. And Crimea became part of Russia. It was definitely against US and NATO interests. First time, US officials, US capital, I can say even Brussels, but in less scale, were attacked by another country. Not neutral position, not defense, but attack. And because it was an attack, it was threat. And because it was very big support, by the way, to this step, not in West European countries, a little bit in West European countries, not in the US, a little bit in the US. Not all Americans are against Russia, not all Europeans are against Russia. But it was big support to this initiative in Arab countries. And this is important for United States. I mean, support for Putin-Russia initiative in Crimea and so on. Not because Arab countries like the idea to make Crimea part of the Russian territory. For them, it's not important. But they said, we are happy that first time NATO was defeated. And NATO was defeated. First time in the 21st century. Directly, openly. And of course, it's not pleasant for Washington and it's not pleasant for Brussels. I mean, Brussels as headquarters of NATO now, not as headquarters of European Union. And this is one of the key questions. But there are also a lot of very important questions as far as Russian life is concerned.
Can I just, Alexandr, let me ask a question here.
Yes, of course.
Now, I know the Americans made a big hullabaloo about the violation of international law when Russia took Crimea. And of course, one can argue it one way or the other and say the people that are correct, that certainly on a technical level was a violation of international law. But the Americans don't care about international law. The invasion of Iraq was clearly a far more egregious violation of international law than what happened in Crimea. So when something happens within their camp or within their interest, international law is just something to be brought out or put away depending on the moment. If Russia had been more integrated into Western capitalism and there wasn't this kind of contention, Crimea probably wouldn't have been such a big deal. They would have found a way around it. And in fact, it was interesting because Kissinger said, during the real height of the crisis, he said, this is really an exception, Crimea. You shouldn't say this is the pattern of Russian behavior. And Crimea is a very particular situation because of that history, that it used to be part of the Soviet Union and so on, part of Russia. And what I'm getting at here is there's something deeper driving this contention. And obviously on the American side, they like geopolitical tension. They like to have an enemy. They like to have an excuse to spend money on arms and all the rest. But what else is going on here? Because there seems to be something the West wants from Russia it's not getting, and it's not really to do with peace and such, because I don't see where there's really such aggressive behavior to talk about.
So, first of all, I'm not talking about aggressive behavior of Russia. I said that Russia did not follow to the rules of NATO. It's not aggression. It's simply not to follow to the rules of NATO. And it's the rules of NATO. It's not problem of international legislation. As you said, the United States and other countries many times made things which are absolutely opposite to international legislation, international law. By the way, in the UN declaration, which was signed in UN United Nations status, if I'm not mistaken, there are words, every people has a right for the self-determination. And they can say, we don't want to be inside this state. We have right for self-determination. And this is one law. And not changes borders, it's second law. Second part of the same status of United Nations. So it's two contradictory elements in international legislation on the top level status of the United Nations. But let's go back. You said very important words. United States needs to have enemy. And it was newly invented enemy in the beginning of 20th century when world terrorism became symbol of this enemy. It was Iraq as a terrible enemy of mankind. Now Russia became enemy. And it's simple to make Russia enemy because it was, I don't know, more than 50 years, nearly 70 years of confrontation between Soviet Union and Russia. But I want to stress that from Russian point of view, situation is not also very simple. Inside our country, we have economic recession. We have very liberal, in very contradictory way, semi-feudal, semi-liberal capitalism, brutal capitalism, capitalism of the 19th century. I said a few times in your program and even made a special program about Russian Jurassic Park of capitalism. capitalism is Jurassic Park in Russia. It's terrible, brutal capitalism, which is much more liberal and dangerous for people than capitalist system in the United States, even. And the problem is that when our government, our leaders, our president made these decisive steps in foreign policy, he received very big popularity. And now for the left forces, for really democratic, social democratic forces, communist forces, trade unions, citizens, for all of us, it's very difficult to criticize social and economic policy of our leaders, because everybody tell, okay, maybe in internal affairs our leaders are not very good, but they made very good and positive step in foreign policy. I don't think so. And it's very important to stress that it's necessary to criticize Russian leaders, but not for Crimea mainly or only. It's necessary to criticize, I can say even not for Crimea, but for internal policy, social policy, economic policy, absence of real human rights, defense of human rights, protection of human rights, absence of real democracy. But also this is part of general world situation. I had interesting international discussion in Vienna, in Austria, just a few weeks ago. And I said it's very difficult to say negative words against Putin in Russia. It's possible, but difficult. And the Austrian friend said, but Comrade Buzgalin, Professor Buzgalin, did you hear any time positive words about Putin from first channel of US TV or in the New York Times? I asked this question to my friends from United States, professors, different intellectuals, militants of social movements, and they said never. So it's nearly forbidden to say something positive about Putin in US, and it's nearly forbidden to say something negative about Putin in Russia. It's a very negative situation when one negative situation in US is alter ego of negative situation in Russia. And it's very important for all of us in the United States, in Russia, to make as much as possible for real friendship of people. This is old slogan, but I think it's necessary to renew this slogan, to update or reload this slogan of friendship of people. People of US or peoples of US and peoples of Russia. We have different peoples in our country.
Alexandr,
between people, the better for all of us.
Alexandr, how much penetration and freedom does U.S. capital have in Russia? How much access do they have to ownership of, say, natural resources, oil? And if they have not as much as they would like to the Russian market and resources, is that part of what's driving all this?
This is also an important aspect. First of all, just 200 meters from the room where we have our dialogue, there is the biggest McDonald's in Europe. So it's still in this place. There is Pizza Hut, there is Burger Queen, Kentucky Fried Chicken. We have mega malls with Metro, with, I don't know, Ashan. All these transnational corporations are in Russia. This is important. But really, we have our government made some restrictions for interventions in oil and gas business, and maybe this is not very pleasant for Western corporations. This is important. There are difficulties for Western business in Russia, but this is not something special for Westerners. Russian business also have a lot of problems with corruption, bureaucracy, and semi-feudal model of Russian economy. What is important, Russian business, our native business, is also very interconnected with the West. Still, a lot of transactions are in dollars, a lot of accumulations are in dollars. Majority of wealthy Russians has accounts, even if it is Sberbank, Russian bank. They will have account in euro or in US dollars. Up to $100 billion per year is leaving Russia and going to offshore zones. Very often from offshore zones, this capital is going to US economy or to transnational corporations, which can have business everywhere, including China and so on. So really, we don't have so bad relations, if I can say so, between business in US and business in Russia. Business is still in friendship relations. And daughters of our oligarchs and son of our oligarchs has education in have education in Britain or in Harvard. So it's not a real confrontation. It's more game, but very dangerous and very unpleasant. And I want to repeat, dangerous game. Confrontation is mainly in the sphere of ideology. And as a result of this confrontation, we have in Russia growth not even of patriotism, but of a great power chauvinism. And this is also negative for internationalism, for friendship of people inside Russia, for our friendship with Europeans, with US citizens, and so on. That's why all these games of US government, first of all, and our government, maybe they play second role. All these games are really very, very negative for all our country.
Alexander, the Chinese have a policy for a few decades now of no direct confrontation with the United States. They do very little about asserting any kind of military footprint outside of Chinese borders. Of course, there's some points of confrontation, Taiwan and the South China Sea, but generally speaking, it's all kind of economic expansion. But Russia's increasingly playing a role more in militarily, globally, obviously in Syria. But even apparently the Russians reopened 10 bases in the Arctic that had been closed but were originally Soviet bases. They're apparently doing more long-range flights towards the American border. And I'm just wondering, how is that in Russia's interest to project that kind of a presence? I'm not suggesting they don't have the right to. I'm just wondering why it's in their interest to do so.
I'm afraid that these steps are mainly a result of two contradictions. First contradiction is contradiction between ideological, propagandistic slogans of US leaders and Russian leaders. And as I said, this propaganda war or ideological war, geopolitical confrontation, is an important factor of modern life. And for our government, for our leaders, ruling party, United Russia, it's profitable to have this, how to say, military game and to show that we have strong muscles and Russia is big state. It's not really big state. If we look on economy, it's a very contradictory state if we look on social sphere, but it's good game to at least create image or create at least image of strong power in the military sphere. And because Russia has really heroic past, especially war against fascism and so on, this is pleasant for feelings of many Russians.
In the United States, there is a tremendous amount of money to be made out of conflict and militarization, and a lot of people suggest, a lot of experts suggest, that a lot of U.S. foreign policy is driven by the idea of feeding the military-industrial complex and such. Is the same kind of thing going on inside Russia, that some of these confrontations help justify expenditures in the military sector?
You're right. This is second contradiction which I wanted to describe. And second contradiction is contradiction between two countries' military-industrial complex. Growth of military-industrial complex in U.S. provokes the same for Russia and vice versa. In the United States, this is very profitable for corporations and not good for people. The same in Russia, except one detail. In Russia, growth of military-industrial complex gives money mainly not to oligarchs, but to, from one hand, bureaucracy and some state enterprises, state corporations, a little bit for private business. But from another hand, it gave very contradictory, but in some aspects, progressive, had a progressive influence, because as a result, after 20 years of collapse of high tech, of education and science, because of growth of military-industrial complex, we have now growth of technical education. We have growth of research centers in physics, in mathematics, in many other spheres. We have reconstruction of industrial enterprises, not only military industrial enterprises, but also civil industrial enterprises which must produce equipment for military industrial complex. And this is a contradictory situation. Of course, from our point of view of alternatives of my friends, it's much better to make investments in peaceful high tech, not in military high tech. Peaceful education, not education for military purposes. Science for peace development, not science for military development. Of course, it could be much, much better. But now in Russia, as I said, we have such type of development, which is dangerous in geopolitical aspects, negative, in political and ideological aspect, negative, but creates some positive economic results. This is big, big contradiction.
And just finally, why is Putin so interested in involvement in Syria? He says that it's essentially that American policy is such a disaster, it's leading to the spread of ISIS, and Russia had to intervene to prop up Assad's government as the only way to fight ISIS. I mean, is that what it is, or is there more to it?
I think there are three main reasons. First, but not the most important, there are some interests of Russian gas oil corporations in the Middle East and in Syria in particular. It is interconnected with geography, with specific position of Syria as key country in all these crossroads of oil movement and gas movement. Second reason, which is more important, it's an internal reason. When Russia made some decisive actions in Syria, Putin government, all leaders of officials in our country received big new wave of support. First time Russia became world player, global player, and we showed that we can do something not only on our border, but we can help to Arab people to establish peace. This is model how it is presented in Russia. And there are some real true in this expression, but there are also a lot of propagandistic, slogans. And third reason, also very important, Russia received not small support among many political forces, social forces in Arab countries. I cannot say governments, but social and political forces in Arab countries now has some hopes. I think they are not realistic, but there are hopes among Arab people that Russia will behave as Soviet Union and will protect Arab countries against US, Israel, and so on. Again, I don't think that Russia can do this and will do this, and even I am not sure that our officials want to do this. But such hopes took place, and this is also very profitable for our officials, for foreign policy of Russian government and state in general.
The Russian role in Syria is positioned by many as being quite confrontational with the U.S. It was important for Russian foreign policy to block the U.S. there and have a kind of counterweight. But I think a lot of American professional opinion, both in the Pentagon and other places, in even the White House, actually see Russia perhaps as helping save America's bacon in Syria. They certainly saved Obama on the chemical weapons thing by helping intervene on getting rid of chemical weapons at a time that Obama was on the verge of having to bomb Syria, and I don't think really wanted to. And also in terms of helping actually direct the fight against ISIS. But is this inside Russia? Is this played as a very big piece of nationalistic pride that Russia is standing up to the United States in Syria?
No, it's not nationalistic pride. It's more pride of Russian peoples and pride for the country, for the state, which can help to establish peace. At least this is the picture translated from Russian TV, radio, and other mass media for ordinary people. There are, as I said, some elements of truth. I am not expert. I don't have enough information about real situation in Syria. But what I heard, it's positive in general, of course, with a lot of negative aspects, but in general, positive role of Russian military forces, air forces in Syria, in the struggle against world terrorism and against this transportation of oil from to Turkey and so on. This is vision from Russia. Russia is playing positive role in order to help to Arab countries to fight against terrible Muslim terrorism, radical Muslim terrorism. This is picture in Russia. As I said, not only this positive mission is a reality. Reality is also interests of our gas and oil corporations, real interest of Russian state to receive more support from Arab countries. And I think it is also very contradictory interest of Russian officials to have ruling forces of modern Iraq as those who will continue to be the leaders of the country because they are pro-Russian. This is a very contradictory situation because these ruling forces are very authoritarian and corrupted. But this is the reality. What can I say more?
Okay, thanks very much for joining us, Alexandr. We'll continue this soon.
Okay, I'm very glad to talk with you. And as conclusion, I want to stress again, in all this situation, the key task is to help to US and Russian peoples to develop friendship or to rebuild friendship. This is extremely important. And the more we have negotiations, the more we have dialogues, not only about geopolitics, but about culture, science, education, mutual interests in this sphere, the better for all countries in the world, not only for US and for Russia.
Right,
and thank you for the opportunity to tell you these words.
Great, thanks very much. And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.